Hello, everybody. We're getting ready to start. We're all hooked up for streaming. Can the panelists please come forward? That's Carlos, Natasha, Bob, and Tamara, and Samira are our co-chairs. I don't know if we got enough chairs for everybody, but we could bring a couple of more chairs up here. And we're going to get started in hopefully about a minute. You can sit right here. Well, we need to get a couple more chairs. Thank you. Thank you. Have a seat.
Gail, Carlos, you're welcome to grab a seat. We might have to get more chairs. So we're starting with the video greeting.
Come sit. Who are we missing?
Nobody. We're just gonna need more chairs once we get started.
We're missing Gail. Okay, good. Okay. Okay, folks. I think we're going to start. My name is Ike Nahum, one of the organizers of the conference. I'll call this second and final session of our wonderful US-Cuba, International US-Cuba Normalization Hybrid Conference. I just will say briefly that after a long and productive day, I don't know whether to stress the long or the productive, but I think it was definitely both, which was really our first real semi-public gathering as a growing movement to fight the blockade. So that yesterday was good. We got a lot of information. We anticipated, we came together, and now today is the day that we are projecting action for the next period through the rest of 2022. We have a great short panel which will register what is already happening in terms of action on many different fronts and what we project through 2022. So without further ado, I want to introduce our co-chairs for this morning, Tamara Hansen from the Vancouver Committees in Solidarity with Cuba and an executive member of the Canadian Network on Canadian Network on Cuba, and Dr. Samira Adre, who I think everybody knows and who was chaired last night, and wonderful sister. So anyway, take over and thank you.
All right, folks, welcome to day 2. We're going to start pretty quickly here with an important greeting from South Africa. We have a message. Okay, we have a message of solidarity and support for the conference from Clever Banganai, thank you, who is the Deputy Secretary of the Association of Friends of Cuba in South Africa, or FOCUS. It's a huge honor to have a video greeting from him this morning. Then we'll be going to a message from Friends in Grenada, and then we'll be going into, as Ike mentioned, talking about Cuba and the battle of ideas our tasks and perspectives towards ending the unjust blockade on Cuba. So thank you everyone who's here in person in New York City, and looking really forward to connecting with everyone online, as well as following the dynamic chat yesterday on the live stream. So welcome everyone who's joining us around the world. Samira, you want to add?
All I want to say is please pay attention, because at the end we hope to raffle off a few goodies, showing our constant, all the learning that we've done and shared here, that we're actually paying attention, and we're going to take these details and share them with our friends and family. So we look forward to that too.
Woo! All right. So without further ado, we'll bring the greeting from our friend Clever in South Africa.
Friends of Cuba Society, a voluntary organization of South Africans which seeks to promote solidarity with peoples and sovereign government of Cuba, takes this opportunity to bring fraternal greetings from the people of South Africa and Africa. We want to congratulate the organizing committee for this historic hybrid solidarity conference with Cuba, taking place in the middle of the most devastating pandemic of our lifetime. The conference brings together dozens of organizations here in the United States and Canada, as well as many others around the world, who have for years been fighting tirelessly against this illegal economic blockade on Cuba. The harsh and brutal measures that are imposed on Cuba, in addition to a blockade lasting more than 60 years, are directly aimed at suffocating the development of Cubans and reducing to a minimum the hard currency resources which are indispensable in meeting the needs for food, healthcare, education, services, as well as other essential needs needed by Cubans. A more shameless violation of country sovereignty is hard to imagine. Cuba has been at the side of the people of Africa since the early days of the Cuban Revolution. At the most critical moments of the struggles of freedom and justice in this continent, the people of Africa have been able to count on the solidarity of the people of Cuba. We have been ready to share their limited resources, their sweat, and their blood. Cuba's role in support of the liberation of Southern Africa at the cost of more than 2,000 Cuban lives, whose names are inscribed in the walls of Freedom Park in South Africa, and the engagement of over 350,000 voluntary combatants for more than 15 years, was crucial to help safeguard the territory and integrity of Angola, to pave the way for the independence of Namibia, and to defeat the apartheid and release of Comrade Nelson Mandela and his comrades from apartheid prisons. Thousands of Africans have been trained as professionals in Cuba, while hundreds of thousands of Cubans, mainly youth, have spent crucial periods of their lives on African soils as internationalists, most in the military capacity, but also as doctors, teachers, engineers, and other civilian activities, without ever claiming wealth or reward. Above all this, South Africa has currently more than 3,000 young people being trained as doctors in Cuba, and hundreds of them have now graduated and are working in our hospitals back home. It has been a history of unique and unbending solidarity that registers in the history of this continent as the most loyal expression of friendship. Cuba has undertaken solidarity not as a means of foreign policy, but as a moral and fraternal commitment to the peoples of Africa. Solidarity with Cuba is therefore a moral duty for the peoples of Africa. It must take the form of constant education for young generations, and it must be an active engagement of public support for Cuba and of rejection of the US-imposed economic blockade. We call upon all South Africans to stand with Cuba and demand the end of the illegal economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed on Cuba by the United States. We also demand that the United States comply with the resolution that in the past 23 years has been adopted at the General Assembly of the United Nations for ending the blockade. We finally want to thank the people of Cuba and the Cuban Revolution for being the first to send help to our country at the peak of the pandemic in 2020. Long live the people of Cuba. Amandla.
All right. So next up, we have a message from our friends in Grenada, delivered. Well, I'll be reading the message, but it is a message from Dr. Terry Marishaw. Terry is a Cuban-trained doctor who was head of the Grenadian Students Organization in Cuba at the time of the October 1983 counter-revolution, and then bloody U.S. invasion of Grenada. He is the founding leader of the Maurice Bishop Patriotic Movement. And I hope everyone knows the New Jewel movement history of Grenada. If we don't, we should look that up. The fallen leader, Maurice Bishop, was highly influenced and inspired by the Cuban Revolution. But unfortunately, that revolution in Grenada was short-lived, and of course ended in a brutal invasion of the island by the US. So here goes the statement from Dr. Terry Marishaw. We of the Grenada-Cuba Friendship Association salute your Solidarity Conference on behalf of the Cuban people, especially at this critical juncture in our history. We recognize the tremendous hardships that the Cuban people have had to undergo over the last 60 years, made even worse by the policies of the Trump and now the Biden administration, all determined to inflict more pain and suffering on a people whose only sin is that they refuse to bend to the dictates of Washington. Today, with all of the talk and rhetoric about the right of the people of Ukraine to self-determination, which incidentally we endorse, we wonder why for 60 years this same right has been denied the Cuban people who are reeling under the deleterious effects of a criminal blockade that has been suffocating them. It is time for Washington to unconditionally lift this economic blockade and allow the Cuban people to breathe and to develop their country as they see fit in the interests of their people who have resisted and continue to resist as no other country in history has had to do. The world needs Cuba, who has taught us many lessons over the years about struggle, survival, resilience, and altruism in the face of adversity. If more countries were like Cuba, what a wonderful world we would have. Long live Cuba. Long live international solidarity.
Thank you, Sister Samira, for sharing that beautiful message. And thank you to Steve Clark for bringing us that message today as well from Grenada. I would now like to introduce Carlos Lazo, a Cuban-American leading the charge to transform our US-Cuba policy and ending the criminal US blockade on Cuba. He's the founder of Puentes de Amor, or Bridges of Love, and has really done an amazing job to revitalize the international movement to end the blockade on Cuba. So we heard from him last night. Looking forward to hearing from him again today on our tasks and perspectives towards ending this unjust blockade. Please give a warm welcome to Carlos Lazo.
Well, good morning, everyone. When I was reflecting early this morning about what we have accomplished so far and all the tasks that we need to achieve to lift the blockade. I was going back, and because sometimes we think that this is something like a never-ending work. 63 years of working and trying to lift this criminal blockade against the Cuban people, and it seems that we don't see results. And I remember in 2004, the Bush administration put in place measures that prevent families from visiting each other. The Bush administration prohibited Cuban Americans from visiting their families. We could go just once every 3 years. I was at that time in Iraq, and I came back from for my 2 weeks of R&R, and I was not able to visit my children who were in Cuba. And imagine, I was in a vacation, going back to the United States, being a combat medic in Iraq, and suddenly my government prohibited from visiting my family. And many Cubans, many people start fighting against that injustice. And from 2004 to 2000, it took 5 years for our voices to be heard. And then in 2009, when President Obama won the presidency, he lifted those restrictions. I mean, change is not easy. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes we don't see the results of what we do. However, we should feel that we are a link in the change of progress. Maybe we don't see the ending result, but all links are important. Everyone, every struggle, every person who is fighting for this is putting a grain of sand to build those bridges of love. And sooner than later, the blockade is going to be lifted. And when we look back and we say, why we could keep this cruelty over the Cuban people for so many years? But at that point, it won't matter, because at that point, there won't be blockade. In 2020, when the pandemic struck, before that, we were taking students to Cuba. I was so happy, 2017, 16, taking my students to Cuba. I'm a teacher, and I took a group of 40 students, and I could see with my own eyes what bridges of love was in real life. I saw those American students and their families going to Cuba and exchanging with Cuban people, teaching Cuban people about their values, their communities, and also learning from the Cuban people about their Cuban values and communities. But suddenly Trump came and everything stopped. And the pandemic came, and Trump kept pressing the Cuban families, pressing the Cuban people, this time making super harder for everyone, asphyxiating the Cuban families. And the movement, the movement of Cubans who fight against the blockade never have been very big. They have been, always there have been examples of people, caravans in the past. But this time, more Cubans start joining to the fight. It was about families. It was not just, and for Cubans, it's very interesting what is happening in the Cuban community. This, for them, have nothing to do with politics. It have to do with families. It have to do with our rights to care for our families, our right to visit our families, our right to send money to our families, our right to have a normal relationship with the country where we were, with our nation of birth. And then things start moving, and we went in a caravan, as I explained to you yesterday, from biking from Seattle to Washington, D.C. We were 5 people. And then suddenly in Miami, some people start joining, and they start doing caravans. And first it was 7 people. Then later it was 10. Then later it was 20. Then Americans start joining, and today we have caravans, not just in Miami, the brothers and sisters around the United States, Network, Cuba Movement, different organizations in Los Angeles, in Seattle, have been supporting the Miami caravan, and now we have caravans around the world every month, asking the U.S. government to lift sanctions. And the caravans are not in the media. Usually the press doesn't report this, but there is a movement of people around the world that is a reflection of the 180-something countries that vote every year against the blockade. We also not just doing, this next Sunday, we have another caravan, and we have caravans in different cities in the world, in Canada, in Vancouver, in the United States, in Miami. We are gonna leave from the Tamiami Park. It's great, that caravan. Anytime that we go there, we have the haters publicize themselves in the media, and we don't have any publicity. But when we go to the caravan, we have 200 people and they have 10 people. And that, if that is a reflection of what people feel, but people want the lifting of the sanctions. People want a good relationship between our two countries. It's not just about caravans. We have been following also examples of other brothers and sisters in the United States and around the world who have been doing solidarity, helping Cubans in these times of needs. And for us, it was a great example to follow and to do a little contribution to the effort initiated by Bob here with other organizations about getting donation for syringes. And that gave us some example to follow. And then Code Pink organized the sending milk and tuna to Cuba. And for us, it was great to be part of that effort too. And nowadays, we are also sending or trying to send milk to all the Cuban pediatric hospitals. And I'm very glad to inform you that this has the contribution of many Cuban Americans that over ideologies, they stated like that. They said, I don't care about politics, I care about my family. And I think that this is one of the importance that have bridges of love, puentes de amor, that go to the heart of the people. Don't talk about politics, even when politics is important. But here, the politics of the heart, the politics of love is moving people. And eventually, the Cuban American community is gonna join, is gonna be part of this new paradigm where people just is with the Cuban people, embracing the Cuban people for life, for the lifting of the blockade, for respecting the Cuban sovereignty. That's what I have to say. I want to say thank everybody here in this place because you have been so welcoming to me and to Bridges of Love and so supportive, and to Cubans who, besides their ideologies, they want to contribute to the lifting of the blockade. Thank you very much, and God bless everyone. Okay.
Thank you so much, Brother Carlos Lazo. It's very important, the message that he just shared with us, but also made us think of the great sacrifice and risk that Cuban Americans and others who are involved in these caravans and have been involved in the movement before the Puentes de Amor's caravans have had to live through the sacrifice of their safety, because every time they go out, they have to worry about people filled with hate coming to shut them down. But they continue to go forward in love. And this whole movement is an inspiration because it's been going for decades with people, giving up their personal time and their free time to advocate for Cuba. And so I just want to lift that up because even this space has been under threat because of its solidarity with Cuba. And so we have to give thanks to the immense sacrifices that activists have been making throughout this time to continue to press forward with the message of love for Cuba, despite being attacked by people who are filled with hate. So love is the message for today. Now I have the pleasure of reintroducing my comrade, Tamara Hansen, who will be speaking next. Tamara Hansen is an executive member of the Canadian Network on Cuba, coordinator of the Vancouver Communities in Solidarity with Cuba, and author of 5 Decades of Cuban Revolution, The Challenges of an Unwavering Leadership. She has traveled to Cuba 15 times, often traveling on the Che Guevara Volunteer Work Brigade, the IFCO Pastors for Peace Caravan, and the Calixto Garcia Brigade. She's a high school teacher of French, Spanish, and English, and a union member. Give it up for Tamara.
Thank you so much, Samira, and thank you everybody for being here today, and again, continuing what I think has been a really great weekend of work. It's really an honor to be joining you here in New York City from Vancouver, Canada. In a time that I think organizing against the blockade is becoming more and more important. And I say that pretty much every time I speak against the blockade. As time passes, things get more intense, but also we know that there's been some rumblings in the Biden administration, generally so far not in our favor, but that means that it's time to put the pressure on. It's time for us to build our movement. And so with the acceleration of US attacks on Cuba and Cuba's challenging post-pandemic recovery, it's reinforcing for us our responsibility to strengthen our efforts to defeat the blockade on Cuba. This must be a political priority for the Cuba Solidarity Movement and for all friends of Cuba around the world, alongside the great heroic Cuban people. I want to say that it has been a real pleasure to work with the US-Cuba Normalization Conference Committee for 2 years now. We've brought together an amazing series of webinars and this weekend's conference. While COVID-19 has made Cuba solidarity work very different and more challenging, we have been able to use new technologies to maximize our cooperation across time zones and across borders, and really, I think, build an important and strong connection. While we are working locally and nationally in the United States and Canada, we strive to build a stronger and more effective Cuba solidarity movement. I believe that yesterday and today, working together with you folks under the banner and umbrella of the US-Cuba Normalization has reminded us that this work needs to continue. And I want to ask, do y'all agree with me? All right, awesome. I would like to suggest further that we extend this collaboration to worldwide international activities. We need to have a strong international movement to bring working and oppressed people to join us in the campaign against the US blockade of Cuba. Part of this work has been started over the years by our friends at the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the Peoples. Another key has been the tremendous recent work of Carlos Lazo and Puentes de Amor. But we must go further and find new ways to broaden our solidarity movement. We know that today Cuba needs this urgently. We believe that all political work must be consistent and organized into campaigns to be effective. In Vancouver, we call it the 3 C's: consistency, cooperation, and creativity. We know that US imperialism is very organized and consistent in its attacks on Cuba. So, logically, our response to US aggression must also be serious, consistent, and united to build an effective international movement. At the moment, Vancouver Communities in Solidarity with Cuba has 2 consistent monthly actions demanding an end specifically to the US blockade on Cuba. The first is participating and organizing the monthly virtual picket actions organized by the Canadian Network on Cuba, which I know many of you have been participating in, and we thank you so much for that. On the 17th of every month, folks from around the world are joining on Zoom and Facebook to talk about their opposition to the unjust US blockade on Cuba, as well as their local activities and perspectives. We've heard about walks happening in Ireland, car caravans in Tunis, Tunisia. We've heard about rallies in front of US consulate in Perth, Australia, rallies outside of the US Embassy in Kiev, Ukraine. All of these things have been a dynamic part of our work during this pandemic. In fact, we've had 23 monthly virtual picket actions since May 2020, and these expanded on previous in-person pickets, which were happening at US consulates and embassies on a monthly basis in Vancouver, Montreal, and Ottawa in Canada, and Kiev, Ukraine, every month. We have had speakers from over 100 nations since we started in May 2020, with speakers from every continent except Antarctica. I hope that you will consider joining us on April 17th for our next monthly virtual picket. Monthly car caravans and Puentes de Amor are the second consistent monthly project in Vancouver, and this has been able to unite us with the international caravan movement on the last Sunday of every month. Carlos Lazo already outlined the importance of this work, but it really has been fantastic for us in Vancouver. We brought two printed reports with us about our work on the caravan. One of them is from the Canadian Network on Cuba and the other from Vancouver, and we'd be happy to share some of those with you folks if you're interested to learn about that work. And so we really must applaud Carlos Lazo for his work in revitalizing this campaign. Puentes de Amor has done fantastic work, and we need to get behind Carlos and support his important projects. The virtual pickets and caravans are only part of the work against the blockade. There are so many other ideas and areas to build, and we're going to hear more about them this morning. Online petition campaigns, creative campaigns to build awareness, banner drops, art displays, poetry contests, Twitter storms, sharing articles and videos on social media, global days of action, letter writing to print and alternative media, passing resolutions in city councils and labor councils, webinars, rallies, petitions, fundraising campaigns, and campaigns to call our politicians. The list goes on. Today's closing plenary, we're going to hear from some important campaigns that have been in the works in this time of pandemic. And I just wanted to, before we go there, add a little bit about some of the work that's been happening in Canada, because I know that we're going to be pretty focused in the United States. For the Saving Lives campaign, you're going to hear about the work Cuba has done controlling the spread of COVID-19 and how they sent doctors and medical professionals to over 35 countries worldwide on 5 continents to help fight the pandemic. Let's give a round of applause for Cuban healthcare professionals. The Saving Lives campaign has been all about how Canada and the US can learn from Cuba in its preventative and internationalist perspective on medicine, especially during the pandemic. Today, we'll also highlight the great work that has been achieved to reach out to politicians on all levels of government in the US and Canada. We'll hear of some of these achievements from ACERE and from the Saving Lives Resolutions campaign. I would also like to highlight that in Canada, the Canadian Network on Cuba has had 2 petitions to Parliament demanding that they push President Biden for an end to the cruel blockade on Cuba. We reached 3,375 signatures and 1,732 signatures nationally on both petitions, and we are now waiting for the Parliament of Canada to table their official response. Our work with Global Partners for Health and other groups like Code Pink and Puentes de Amor will also be highlighted this morning with successful fundraising efforts, including medical aid and raising awareness about how the blockade is impacting Cuba's ability to develop its healthcare system. From the Canadian Network on Cuba, we were able to send 1.9 million syringes to Cuba for the vaccination campaign against COVID-19. And even more impressive, of course, is the campaign that was organized here in the United States with over 6 million syringes sent to Cuba, and a great testament to what is possible when we work together. We will also hear about various ways folks can travel to Cuba. We've done so much talking this weekend, it's time to make some travel plans. So, whether it is with IFCO Pastors for Peace, the National Network on Cuba's Mayday Brigade, the Venceremos Brigade, or the Canadian Network on Cuba's Che Guevara Volunteer Work Brigade, We encourage folks of all ages and backgrounds to head to Cuba for one of these wonderful solidarity trips to experience Cuba for themselves. I know that there are materials available, and I encourage you to pick them up. So I want to wrap up saying, where do we go from here? Working together has been a huge step forward for us in North America. Together, working with La Table de Concertation et de Solidarité Québec-Cuba, the National Network on Cuba, the Canadian Network on Cuba, the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the Peoples, and the US-Cuba Normalization Conference Committee, we have built a powerful, multifaceted Cuba solidarity campaign against the blockade. This work must continue after the conference today. The whole point is to find common ground, our points of unity, develop collaboration and teamwork with patience, with confidence and trust, to build a united front that can work with consistency, cooperation, and creativity, building a campaign that is strong enough to truly end the criminal US blockade on Cuba once and for all. Our international work has really grown in leaps and bounds, so let's continue working together to defend Cuba against the US empire and the cruel, unjust blockade. Abajo el bloqueo! Abajo el bloqueo! Lift the blockade on Cuba! Viva Cuba! Gracias.
Right on. Thank you, Tamara. So now I have the pleasure of introducing my beloved Gail Walker. So, well, for those of you who don't know Gail, I've had the pleasure of working with her in the past 2 years, but being under her tutelage for over pretty much a decade, we can say now. And I know her in a capacity of being the leader of IFCO Pastors for Peace, a job that is not easy, but she does it with so much grace and a quiet fierceness, honestly. She is the queen bee of this complex that is IFCO Pastors for Peace, a small organization, but that is carrying a lot on its shoulders. And it is humbling to work with her and see all the different facets in which she has to lead. And honestly, her work in the solidarity movement is part and parcel of the continuity that is the work that Reverend Lucius Walker started with IFCO's Pastors for Peace in 1967, culminating in different projects, but then with Cuba for the past 30 years. So we want to give a lot of love and applause to Gail Walker.
Hello, good morning, everybody. I am always honored by my dear sister, Samira, who's so generous with her words. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try to move past this. This is a little confusing, this session, right? Because we're talking about the battle of ideas, countering anti-Cuba lies and propaganda. Not an easy task, and one that we are all collectively responsible for. And so it's great to have this esteemed panel here talking about the important work that's being done. There may be a little bit of repetition. My dear sister Tamara took a couple of words right out of my mouth. I said, well, so you may hear a little bit of overlap, but that's because we're all in this together. So it's a big task. That's essentially the responsibility of our broad-based international Cuba solidarity movement to think about how it is we move forward to counter the lies, the distortions, the propaganda. I think it's fair to say that everybody in this room has been bombarded with negative propaganda about Cuba, from the lies of about political prisoners to the lack of elections to lack of freedoms, ridiculous claims that people are forced to be out in the streets for protests and for things like May Day, et cetera. So we know that the disinformation, the misinformation campaign about Cuba is relentless, and it's nonstop. the reality is that no matter what Cuba does, no matter how noble her efforts are, her gifts are to the world, she is vilified. The gift of medical internationalism is equated with slavery. Its right to establish it's Cuba's right to establish relations with other countries is painted as a threat to U.S. security. You know, how often have we heard that, right? That's a relentless, on a loop, right? Or the fact that Cuba is a one-party system automatically means that the country is run by a brutal dictatorship. So there's so many, you know, and we know all this. But I say this to say, you know, it's kind of impossible for me in a really short period of time to come up here and talk about all of the different ways that we can get to Cuba. I want to get to that, but I want to talk a little bit about what I think is our charge at this moment. That goes back to what Tamara talked about when she said, where do we go from here? Those of us who have supported Cuba over the years, its historic revolution, its beautiful people, have been on a fast-moving train in many ways since 2014. Sometimes exhilarating, other times exhausting and difficult and hard. But allow me just briefly to recap a few key moments. We know that in December 17th of 2014, that Raul and Obama announced steps toward reestablishing diplomatic relations. And on that same day, the release from prison of the 3 remaining Cuban 5 members, as well as Alan Gross, the State Department operative who was in prison for spying in Cuba. And for us hopeless romantics, right? At the same time, there was also the learning the news about Gerardo and Ariana's baby conceived via artificial insemination. I had to stick that in there because that's just such a beautiful story. Sorry. I did, right? Come on, wasn't that incredible? All right, bringing it back. So some travel exchanges were restored. The ability of U.S. Citizens rather to travel to Cuba was eased by the creation of the 12 different categories of travel that the Obama administration put out. Each opened embassies in various countries. ALBA was created as an alternative, right, to the free trade area of the Americas, which was promoted by the U.S., and that would have included all countries in the Americas except Cuba. Right. We also had later the creation of CELAC, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, an initiative of the late visionary President Hugo Chavez. We know that Obama removed Cuba from the list of states that sponsor terrorism, signaling that it was possible to do business with Cuba without facing huge fines for trading with the enemy. Things were moving in a completely different way than they had for the 60 years prior, when you know, we were traveling, we were there, we were very involved and engaged as a community. And then Trump happened. Then Trump was elected. Trump came, along with Trump came the reversal of what Obama did, the 243 coercive measures that made it impossible for Cubans to travel, as Carlos referred to visit their families in the U.S. They made it impossible for remittances to be sent into Cuba and made it impossible for Cuba to access essential goods and services, including fuel. And as Johanna Tablada, Cuba's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, said, these actions only serve to criminalize the Cuban people. And as we're in the midst of pushing back against those policies, then came the pandemic and all that came with it, the shutdown and all of we weren't able to have in-person meetings. Everything we know changed as we knew it. And still we pushed through. And for better or worse, Bob, we found Zoom. You know, that's a two-sided, right? That's a double-sided edge, but we were able to continue to do the work that we were doing. And one of the earliest webinars organized by the NNOC, and soon our movement found its footing, right? We were able to kind of get the word out and do what we needed to do. And as we carefully and gently make our way forward toward a post-COVID reality, the question we collectively must grapple with now, as Tamara said, is what can we do? Where do we go from here? What's new? What's creative? What steps can we take to support Cuba, all while simultaneously pushing for the lifting of the blockade? And I want to say that again, because it's we have to underline the importance of the aid that we collect and take to Cuba is important. And of course, due to the relentless blockade, the tightening of the blockade under the Biden administration, we must continue to do this at this time to bring aid. But simply collecting and donating aid can never supersede our effort to end the genocidal blockade that makes the delivery of the aid necessary, right? You get that, right? The true solidarity work, friends, is lifting the blockade. We can't get it twisted. We can't just embrace medicine here. It's important, but that's not our purpose, right? Our goal as a solidarity community, right, is to do everything we can to change this US policy. And we've got to always remember that, right? We know that Cuba can care for itself, given the space to do so. Our job, our responsibility is to take the US government's foot off the neck of the Cuban people, right? Right? So, you know, for the past 30 some odd years, we have been, at least at IFCO Pastors for Peace and in our movement, we have been looking at different ways to stand in solidarity with our friends. We have built a legacy of support for our Cubans aimed at lifting the US government's blockade. I don't know about you, but I believe in the power of the people to change things that are deemed impossible, right? And against unmeasurable odds, I've seen communities stand up against immovable objects and seen them move. I told this story before, that first caravan, I know when we were organizing, when we crossed the border, it was amazing. We were dancing and celebrating in the streets because we didn't really fully believe what Lucius Walker believed. We kind of followed the guy, but we didn't really think we were going to be able to push through. And surely we were able to. And we were able to kind of continue to build this movement. When they told us that we couldn't make it to Cuba, that it was too hard, that we needed government permission, we said no. And through the power of the people, we declared that love is our license. When we wanted to take a bus and they tried to tell us no, there was a hunger strike. The bus went to Cuba. When they tried to tell us that we couldn't take computers to Cuba, we said we're going to hold a fast and we're going to just, scream from the mountaintops. We have a right to stand in solidarity with our Cuban families, and we did so. And so these are when they said that the Cuban 5 couldn't be released. What did we do? We brought them home. So there's so much more that can be said, but essentially, I want to say that ultimately, we all know that the best way to defeat the myths, right? The myths, the outright lies about Cuba, is to go there to see it for yourselves. And there's a multitude of ways that you can do that. And some of that we've been talking about throughout this weekend. There is, as Tamara mentioned, there is the NNOC Mayday Brigade coming up. Please make sure that you're getting information about that. There's the Venturemos Brigade coming up. There's the IFCO Friendshipment Caravan coming up. There's the Che Brigade coming up. There's the African Awareness Association that is organizing trips to Cuba. So there's a multitude of ways you can do it. I don't care how you do it, just do it, right? Your job, our job, is to set a time, figure out the trip we want to take, get there, be there, stand in solidarity with our friends. And then the most important thing is to return home, to tell our stories, share our stories, because ultimately that is how we're going to chip away at this anti-Cuban narrative. Together, let's normalize travel to Cuba. We're going to just watch a little video that will tell the rest of the story. Thank you.
I came to Cuba because so many people I know have said that it's a place you can read about, but you gotta come here to understand. So the first opportunity that I got, shout out to Pastors for Peace, I was like, I'm coming. I want to see this revolutionary socialist project 90 miles off the shore of the United States.
socialist country and like see it with my own eyes has been such an amazing experience. And, you know, also to get the opportunity to connect with other organizers, other young people who share the same politics, the same, you know, ideology as me has been just amazing.
Taking the next step to actually engage in activities that are supportive, that are loving, that are based on mutual respect, and that are also grounded in understanding.
Common struggle with anyone else who's making that effort, because it has to be international in scope and not just thinking about your own country, but all the countries and movements need to help each other and cooperate.
And I wanted to see it for myself. I wanted to see it in action, and I wanted to learn from all the healthcare, the education, the social infrastructure, the media, the people, the art, the culture, the politics, and the revolution is here and present in Cuba.
Because I wanted to see what it could be like when the working class is in charge of the state, what socialism has to offer for people across the world, and also just to make connections with comrades here, because I think we have so much to learn from the Cuban project and the Cuban people.
That was a beautiful video. Thank you so much, Gail, for bringing that to us today. And thank you also for her comments and her passion here at the conference. I'd now like to give a warm welcome to Bob Schwartz. He is the Vice President of Global Health Partners, and it's a huge honor to have him here today to talk a little bit about the work he's been doing. So let's give a warm welcome to Bob.
Yeah, I'm fine. So I've been asked to speak briefly today about the syringe campaign, the Saving Lives campaign. Can everybody hear me? Is this better? No. Okay. Being left-handed is not easy. This is a right-handed world. So I've been asked to speak today about the Saving Lives campaign, syringe campaign last year, which I believe is probably the most important initiative that the U.S. Solidarity Movement has ever undertaken. As you know, Cuba had a unique problem last year, which in some ways speaks to how Cuba has been forced to live and to function under the blockade. Cuba made a decision early in the pandemic to develop and produce their own vaccines. They didn't trust the COVAX program to deliver sufficient vaccine, and they were concerned that the United States would interfere with vaccine delivery. So in the middle of a pandemic, which devastated their economy, Cuba went to work and they developed 5 vaccines, 2 of which have the same efficacy as Moderna and Pfizer. Amazing, amazing for any country. Now, both of these vaccines require 3 shots. So they had ambitious plans to vaccinate 10 million people they needed 30 million syringes. But Cuba was only able to source and to buy 10 million syringes. If you remember last year, syringes were incredibly difficult to buy. They were difficult to find anywhere in the globe. Every country, every state, every city was looking for the same exact syringe. And if you were lucky enough to find it, the costs skyrocketed. They went up by roughly 800%. So Global Health Partners, which is the organization I work with, and the Saving Lives campaign, which many of you are involved with, together with dozens of local organizations, national organizations in the United States, we launched a campaign to provide Cuba with the syringes they needed to be able to vaccinate their people. We had very modest goals. We budgeted $100,000. We had hoped to purchase maybe 1 million, 1.5 million syringes. But the outpouring of support for this effort was just remarkable. We ended up raising more than $670,000, and many of you were contributors. And thanks to that support, we were able to ship 6 million syringes, and we were able to ship 4 40-foot containers with tons of PPE, the very same PPE that our doctors and frontline healthcare workers were looking for only a year earlier. Masks, gloves, gowns, disinfecting solution. Our success with this campaign helped save countless lives. It helped to vaccinate Cuba's entire population, and it helped reopen the country. The reason the country is open today is because of a lot of the work that all of us did. So I'd like to take a minute to provide some impressions of my work in Cuba. I've been working in Cuba for 28 years, primarily with the Ministry of Health. And it might set the stage for our next major initiative. Over the years, I've interacted with hundreds of doctors, nurses, public health administrators who movingly describe shortages of medicines, medical supplies that we here in the United States take for granted. I've met women who were struggling to survive breast cancer that was diagnosed at a late stage. Why? The result of Cuba's inability to buy diagnostic equipment from US manufacturers. Perhaps most painful for me as a grandfather, I've sat with mothers and fathers who are watching their children die of cancers that are treatable, that would be treatable in the United States, but for the lack of chemotherapy drugs, again, that can't be purchased from companies in the United States. And now, more than 2 years into the pandemic, essential medicines and medical equipment, analgesics, antibiotics, insulin, asthma inhalers, anesthesia machines are in very, very short supply. I don't want to say non-existent, but they're in very short supply in Cuba. And it's difficult for Cuba to buy products from the United States. You've heard that multiple times here. The ambassador has spoke to that. It also prohibits them from accessing foreign credit markets or to buy from third countries. Third countries don't want to send any of these products to Cuba. So to alleviate these shortages, the Saving Lives campaign is once again discussing a joint campaign to provide Cuba with very targeted donations of medical equipment that could help save lives. We're looking at some of the very items that I've just mentioned. All of them are desperately needed on the island right now. And it's going to take time for Cuba to reinflate. Once the pandemic is behind us, it's not as if you just flip a switch and Cuba could immediately go out and purchase any of these items. It's going to be a long haul. So your support helped make the syringe campaign a tremendous success. I'm now hoping that you'll lend a hand once again to support Cuba, their remarkable healthcare system, when we launch our next effort later this spring. I think I'll stop here in the interest of time. Thank you.
Right on. Thank you so much, Bob Schwartz. What can I say? As a physician who trained in Cuba, all of these things were strong moments for us. We had to confront this on a daily in the hospitals and the clinics that we worked in. And the families, the everyday relationships we built, we would see not only with our patients, but our own professors, workers, everyone was impacted severely by these shortages in medical equipment or reagents for lab tests, et cetera, et cetera. All of these that hinder the preventive approach that Cuba has been working on strengthening over the years. And unfortunately, we cannot continue this in a sustained movement of buying these kind of equipment. What we need is what Gail said. We need to end the blockade so that all of this can be done. That's what we need to do. So we'll continue to support the amazing work of Global Health Partners, Saving Lives Campaign, all of that. But always, always remember that stopping and ending the blockade is the essential act that we must commit ourselves to. So I have the honor of introducing Cindy Domingo, who is the U.S. Women in Cuba Collaboration and, is it WILPS? WILPS Cuba and the Bolivarian Alliance Issues Committee. It's a long name. She was excellent in yesterday's panel, of course, and she's here again today speaking as a representative of the Saving Lives Campaign and resolutions.
She didn't really need to reintroduce me, but actually I am wearing a different hat this morning. One of the hats that I wear is part of the labor movement, and I am a member and in leadership of the Seattle chapter of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, which has 20 chapters throughout the country and is the only labor organization that represents Asian American and Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian workers. And it's a member of the AFL-CIO. So how many of you here have been part of doing any resolutions, whether it be city, state, labor, any organizations? Come on. I know some of you have been involved. All right. So we have a number of people that here and a number of people watching that have been part of passing resolutions throughout the country, whether it be community organizations, labor organizations, municipalities, governments, and through the years, but especially during this period of the pandemic, we have been able, as a movement, to pass 43 municipal, county, and labor bodies have passed resolutions not only to to enable us to build relationships with Cuba in this period of the pandemic, because as a pandemic in itself is global, so should international solidarity to defeat the pandemic. And so, as a result of our work, these resolutions represent more than 41 million people in the United States. And through that work, we've been able to educate people about all of the myths about Cuba and why it's so important that especially working people should be establishing international solidarity with Cuba, because there's nothing more important than working people expressing solidarity in the most concrete ways to expose the contradictions between labor and capital. And so as a result of those resolutions, we have been able to expand our work, multiply the number of people who know about Cuba, who are traveling to Cuba now, and want to know more and want to build relationships with Cuban working people. So, however, we want to, especially in this next period, pass resolutions in labor organizations and labor unions. As an example, as I said, a couple of years ago, at the start of the pandemic, we passed a national resolution at the Apollo National Conventions, and Asian Pacific Islanders said, why are we passing a resolution about Cuba? What about our own countries? But as we did the education in the different chapters and at the national convention, people became very interested, and those who knew nothing about the blockade began to say, how can we help lift the blockade? Today in Washington State, we're working on a resolution to hopefully pass at the national convention of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. We can do the same at the national convention of the A. Philip Randolph Institute. Thousands of African American workers we can reach through resolutions like that. And if we do our work well, we can eventually pass a resolution at the national AFL-CIO level impacting 12.5 million workers, impacting 57 national and international labor unions throughout the United States, but internationally. So we really need your help to do this work. And we also, to help you do that, on the Building Cuban Relations with Cuban Labor.org, talk about a long name, you can find all of the resolutions that have been passed through these municipalities, but especially the labor movement. So look at those. We have a packet that tells you, that gives you some guidance about passing resolutions in labor organizations and unions. We have sample resolutions. We have the resolutions that have been passed, and we are available for consultation. But you all have the relationships. You all need to do the hard work from the grassroots level on up to pass those resolutions and to impact working people throughout this country and internationally. So we hope you will contact us and help us pass those labor resolutions in terms of our long-term goal of lifting the blockade.
All right, I'm going to introduce our final speaker for this panel in just a moment. I just also wanted to say a big thank you to Cindy for bringing that important information about the work that's been done in relation to resolutions and how you can get involved. And I also wanted to just say a quick greeting to Gustavo Rojas and the Colombian movement in solidarity with Cuba. Let's give them a round of applause. They've been joining us live on YouTube, and we're hoping to send greetings, but have been unable to. So we just want to send our greetings to them in Colombia. And so now I would like to welcome up to the stage Natasha Bannon. She is with the Alliance for Cuba Engagement and Respect, which is also called ACERE. She's a member of their steering committee. Please give a warm welcome to Natasha.
All right, I'll try to be quick. I know that it's been a long morning, and a lot of what you've heard is really the work that we try to funnel into ACERE, which is the Alliance for Cuba Engagement and Respect. It's about a year and a half old. It's an alliance of 60 grassroots organizations, a steering committee and advisory committee that really is intended to lift up all of this tremendous solidarity work and channel it into progressive policy changes in Washington. Washington is our goal, and as Gail Walker said so eloquently and beautifully, the goal here is the blockade. It's not just doing the solidarity work, which is deeply meaningful, but it's really trying to change US policy. And that's exactly what I said is focused on. So unfortunately, there isn't a lot to report on because there hasn't been a lot of activity in Washington that's been favorable, at least. But I would like to give you just a few highlights about what we've been doing and what the landscape looks like, so that as we're thinking of all of the tremendous work that you're engaged in, how can that translate to a Washington target and focus right? We know that the rhetoric of candidate Biden is very distinct from the policies of President Biden, despite the fact that all of the tremendous, the advancements under the Obama era was a part of his administration. We know the First Lady has traveled to Cuba. These are not big asks that we're asking of him. The White House is the primary focus of a lot of the work that we're doing, given the congressional tensions and the deep polarization that continues to happen politically across the country. The main ask right now have really just been a restoration of what already existed and using that as the basis for us to push for an end to the blockade. But what we've seen, unfortunately, out of the administration is not Trump policies, they're now Biden policies. Right? Biden policies have adopted, for the most part, the 243 sanctions, the deeply polarizing and hostile narrative and rhetoric that's coming out of the administration that really mirrors Cold War era discourse, continuously funding quote unquote democracy work, and we know where that money goes and who benefits from it. OFAC sanctions that are being imposed on tourism sector and travel sector, which is actually one of the most important sectors that was, on the US side at least, propped up under the Obama era. And a promise, which has become kind of this perpetual statement, that Cuba policy is under review, and it's been under review for a year and a half. There was a remittance working group that the administration started that apparently issued recommendations around restoring remittances about 9 months ago. And a recent announcement was made that was probably confusing to a lot of people as to whether or not that was actually coming out of Washington. But in fact, we've seen that really it's not the remittances that have been promised, that it's actually a private effort initiated out of Miami and with a Canadian company. So it's not anywhere close to the remittance restoration that was promised. The embassy has been semi-reopened. That's a really basic diplomatic step. And I say semi because, in fact, most of the consular services, full consular services, have really not been restored. Most of the visa processing is not going to continue to happen in Cuba. Most Cubans will continue to have to go to a third country to request a visa to come here. And so it's important that we kind of distinguish some of that, because it's not actually, time goes quick. It's not actually reflective of what was both campaigned and promised on and what we've been demanding. So quickly in Congress, a quick overview. We know that we're in an electoral cycle this year for congressional midterms. Cuba policy, we also know, is domestic electoral policy, heavily, particularly for this administration, given the ideology and the advisors that govern the policy choices. There have been 3 bills introduced on Cuba, positive ones. The opposition always introduces other ones. In this congressional cycle, 2 on the Senate side, 1 on the House side, that have not gotten the type of support that we would like, but will likely be reintroduced in the next congressional cycle. And we would like to build support towards that. And part of that has been getting congressional letters, meaning members of Congress to sign letters to the White House indicating their support for policy change. We were able to do that just a few months ago. Actually, a year ago, we had 80 members of Congress sign a letter, and we broke that record with 114 members of the House Democratic Caucus send a letter to their president, the Democratic president, indicating their support for very basic Cuba policy changes. That was hugely significant because it really disrupted the rhetoric that's been coming out of the Democratic Party since the summer around Cuba, and signaling to their own party and their own administration that we want to see changes. So we're hoping to continue to do congressional letters of that nature to the White House. And very quickly, how can you all help? It's really, really important. I haven't heard enough about what is the congressional, how are you talking to your members of Congress? It's important that you meet with your local elected officials, state elected officials, but we really members need to hear from you. When you get ACERE alerts or those email blasts, please, please, please reach out, make those calls, send those emails, because it actually means that one additional member will speak up in a way that perhaps they haven't. ACERE is here to help however we can, set up members with you and your representatives, connect you with local groups organizing around this. You can go to our website and figure that out. We also have talking points, particularly to help disrupt and get through some of the really hostile narrative if you're confused about what to say. All of that's on our website. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Really important work that ACERE is doing. And yes, we encourage all of us to be active citizens and push our representatives to represent what we want, what the people want. So please check out ACERE's website and the toolkits to reach out to members of Congress. Now we have the honor of calling up Tom Wojcik, who is the co-chair of DSA International Committee. We would like him to come and share a few thoughts on what he and his group have learned, because came with a strong contingent from DSA, and we're very honored that you all could be with us. So give it up for Tom Wojcik.
It's really nice to see you guys. 2 years it's been since we all got together. Some of you have aged very, very well. But on behalf of the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, which, by the way, this is, I'll be quite brief. We brought a large contingency of young leaders, people from Miami, people from Metro DC, people from New York City, obviously. I'm from Chicago. I just wanted to tell you, none of that would have been possible had this organization not centered sending young people to Cuba. My journey in Cuba started in 2018. I went on the International Mayday Brigade. Going to Cuba for me was like the first step outside of American hegemony, the first step outside of a world that I was told that could only be organized one way. It was like oxygen reaching my brain for the very first time. And it occurred to me that if the miracle of socialism could happen in Cuba, that the miracle of socialism could happen in the United States. I truly and emphatically believe that we are on the precipice of ending this illegal, immoral, devastating, failed blockade of the Cuban people. We are going to end the misery of the blockade. We are going to stand in solidarity with our Cuban brothers and sisters, and we are going to finally put an end to all this for once and for all. So thank you again. If you haven't met our delegation, they're wonderful, wonderful people. Highly recommend you getting in touch with them. But anyway, thank you so much for all of your love and support. Solidarity forever. Thank you.
So we've run low on time for the draw that Samira had proposed of IFCO t-shirts, but we're going to give one to Tom, and we basically stacked the raffle. We just invited him up. Congratulations, Tom. So I want to, before we take a short break to prepare for the amazing concert that is coming up in just a few moments, I am going to be inviting up Mark Friedman from the Los Angeles Cuba Coalition, who's going to talk about the Amazon Labor Union demonstration today. When Mark wraps up, we're going to be going into a short break to set up the tech for our amazing musician today, Arturo Feril. We're going to have a very special concert here at the People's Forum in New York City and live streamed to the world. And so we're really looking forward to that. So I'm just going to quickly welcome up Mark, and then we'll be on our break. So please come on up, Mark.
Thank you. I've been asked to make a short motivational announcement by the Amazon Labor Union and the organizers of this conference that discussed this on Zoom, motivating the ALU demonstration this afternoon. This has been a developing relationship between the ALU, Chris Smalls, Casio Mendoza, and the Cuba Solidarity Movement over 2 years. is a political evolution that was reflected in Chris's presentation and participation in the rally here last night. And Casio, a young Cuban American who was a leader of the Los Angeles Hands Off Cuba Committee and did exactly what many of us would have done in our younger years and came to New York to be part of the Amazon organizing drive with Chris. I believe that this organizing drive is one of the most important going on in the country today. It is from the bottom up. It is not a top-down effort that we have seen failed so many times in recent years. Amazon warehouses are like factories, 7,000 workers in Staten Island at 2 sites that are having votes, one right after each other. Chris was recently arrested for trespassing. This was a trumped-up charge, obviously initiated by Amazon. They had the cops come in and haul him out as a way of intimidating them. There was a very successful fundraiser here at the People's Forum a couple of weeks ago. I think that this event today is an opportunity, especially for us here, to help build the New York, New Jersey committee around Cuba. The demonstration is late this afternoon. All you need to do is Google Amazon JFK 8. People are meeting at the bus stop there, and this will be the last rally before the voting begins. We need to show our support. As Chris has come towards us, we need to go to them and the young workers, especially Black, Latino workers who are involved in this effort. It is part of our outreach. It is the future coming towards us. It is part of the transformation of the Cuba Solidarity Movement, like we have begun to do in LA, going to BLM protests, Palestine marches, women's marches, labor struggles, etc. This is how we will build our movement. Thank you.
All right, so I want to thank everybody for their participation in our closing panel today. We'd really hope to have some time for discussion, but just due to the time of the concert and everything, we've had to readjust. So we're going to have informal discussion now for half an hour while the band sets up. Again, we're so honored to have with us Arturo O'Farrell with us here today and his group for this amazing concert. So thank you so much.
And yes, in the spirit of thanking, we want to especially thank our People's Forum family for having this space. You know, there are houses and there are homes, and this is a safe haven that has been granted us through this wonderful organization. We also want to thank the special security men who've been with us these 2 days. None of this would have happened if we didn't have the People's Forum. So much love. Just like in Pastors for Peace, we say love is our license. For me, People's Forum is saying love is an act of resistance. So this is it. So we thank you.
All right, so we're going to need half an hour for setup. So the concert is going to be starting in half an hour. Please make sure you're back in your seats. Thank you so much, folks.
Time Cuba solidarity activist. Let's hear it for Peggy. Peggy arranged for this and has had a lot of time over the years doing this kind of stuff. Here you go, Peggy. Thank you.
Come on, folks, sit down. Let's get to it. Ladies. Come on, folks. Let's quiet down a little. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is for me to be able to introduce Arturo O'Farrill, or as we call him in Cuba, O'Farrill. No, así? Así, yes. Who is truly an extraordinary human being with multiple accomplishments. And you're about to see and hear his skills from one of them as a musician. Along with the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra, Arturo's first Grammy nomination was in 2005, and he's had 11 nominations since then and won 5 awards.
7.
Of those, the recorded, 7 now, I missed 2?
We're up for 2.
Oh, forgive me. Okay, well, wait a minute. Of those, one of them entitled Cuba, The Conversation Continues, has won the 2016 Grammy Award for Best Instrumental Composition and the 2016 Latin Grammy Award for Best Latin Jazz Album. Arturo is an advocate for the art form and the founder of the Afro-Latin Jazz Alliance, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the performance, education, and preservation of Afro-Latin jazz. He is a professor of global jazz studies and music at the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music, but we in New York are not going to let those folks in California steal him from us, so he's only there half-time and here half-time. Of his many commissions, and he has had a very long list, I want to mention just one in particular because it's of interest to those of us in this room that deal with Cuba. He composed the music for 3 ballets of the Cuban dance company Malpaso. In 2020, he made a musical documentary film called Fandango at the Wall, the US-Mexican border wall, that is, which is an exceptional film, and I recommend that all of you see it. You can find it on the net, Fandango at the Wall. And so without further ado, I give you Arturo.
So I'm just going to talk very little, and my wife would be happy to hear that. There's so much misinformation about Cuba on so many levels. It's unbelievable. I've been going to Cuba since 2002, 4 to 5 times a year. I took my mother and father's cremains there in the Cementerio Colón. So it's a sacred place. It's a sacred place for so many reasons, and to be able to be here with you and to celebrate Cuba, mi gente, my people, is a thrill. Thank you for letting me be here today. Ricky Rodriguez on the bass. Carlos Maldonado on the percussion. This is the centennial of Chico Farrell, the centennial year, and we're celebrating this centennial in May within the Cuba Disco Festival. And so I'm going to play a short piece that my father wrote called Pura Emoción, or in English, Pura Emoción. Ricardo Rodriguez on the bass. Carlos Maldonado on percussion. My name is Arturo O'Farrell. And it's amazing to me, just going back to Cuba just 6-7 years ago, man. There was food, there was jobs, there were businesses, there were people functioning, there was cooperation. And it just is so tragic what has happened to my people, to our people. The embargo is an act, it's a criminal act, it's a horrifying criminal act. And President Biden must be held accountable for this inhumanity. And it is something I've been working with for many years. For 20 years, I've been seen kind of as an unofficial cultural diplomat. Held many events at the residence, at the United States residence. Have been to the Teatro Maya. I can't even tell you how many times I played in the Karl Marx. I've been to Santiago 1,000 times and played there. We had the Jazz Plaza. I inaugurated the Jazz Plaza Santiago Festival. And just I guess 4 years ago, I had the most sublime experience of my musical life. We brought Los Muñequitos de Matanzas to Santiago to play with the conga, and they had never played together. Do you hear that? They've never played together. Both of these bastions of Cuban royalty had never played on the same stage, and we played in Santiago, and this party lasted till late in the hours, out on the street, people celebrating life and celebrating music and celebrating culture and celebrating Afrofuturism, Afro-Cuban reality. We are people of the future. We live in 3 places. We live in our lifespans, we live in time immemorial, and we live in the ancestral lands too. And that's really important. That's one of the reasons Cuba is so sacred. Cuba is so sacred because the ancestors are strong. And then we are not forgotten. We have not forgotten. We'll never forget. We'll never stop having the conversation. So for me, Cuba is that sacred. And it has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with humanity. So please, let's continue to pray. Let's continue to hope. Let's continue to work hard. Let's be socialists, communists, whatever you are. I don't care. Let's continue to go forth and demand accountability for the way that we've been treating Cuba. So you've been hearing a lot of different music. You heard Siboney, and that's La Colonna Mamba Win by Mario Bausa, and Timombo, and of course Pura Emoción. Well, we're very happy to be here. We got one more for you. I don't know what it is. I have to think on my feet, which is really difficult for me. But we'll come up with something. One more time, Ricky Rodriguez on the bass. Carlos Maldonado. My name is Arturo Farrell. Thank you.
Gracias, hermano. Mi placer, mi honor. Muy bien, muy bien. Ya le mandé foto allá.
Thank you. Okay, everybody. Couple of things before we all leave. First of all, let me get my glasses on so I can see. We're just so proud to have these wonderful musicians with us tonight. Let's give them up. What a beautiful way to end this beautiful gathering, our hybrid conference to defeat the blockade. I think this is a great inspiration for us to leave today and go back to our area and organize. Now, speaking of that, we're going to leave now. We managed to draw, as we expected that we would, a few of our opponents earlier. We're talking about ending and everybody leaving, but I just want to inform everybody, in the course of this morning, we managed to draw a couple, and I mean literally, like I think 2 opponents that picketed briefly outside. As you're leaving, and it was handled very well by the People's Forum security, and once again, we can't thank the People's Forum enough for providing us this wonderful space. But we ask you, please, as you leave today, if on your way to the subway or your car or whatever, if you run into any of our opponents, we ask you, do not engage with them. Do not get into conversations with them. Ignore them and proceed to your destination. That's what they want. They want to stage some kind of provocation or confrontation. We don't really have anything to say to them. We organized this. They had a couple of people outside. We're going to move forward to defeat the blockade. Thanks, everybody. Down with the blockade.